I was sitting across from a friend at a coffee shop the other day. We were supposed to be catching up, but his eyes were glued to his phone. His thumb was moving in this rhythmic, almost trance-like motion, left, 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 right. It was mechanical. He wasn't actually looking at the faces or reading the bios. He was looking through them. Watching him, it didn't look like a man searching for a partner. It looked exactly like a gambler sitting at the slot machine in Vegas, mindless and repetitive, just pulling the lever over and over again. You would assume the goal here is to actually find someone, right? But then he got a match. The screen lit up, that little dopamine-inducing notification popped up, and his reaction, nothing. He didn't open a chat, he didn't smile, he barely even registered her name. He just swiped the notification away and immediately went back to the rhythm, left, left, right. When I asked him why he didn't message her, someone he had just claimed to be interested in, he gave me a blank stare and said, I don't know, maybe the next one is better. That moment was chilling. It wasn't about the woman on the screen, it was about the pull. He wasn't dating. He was playing a game of variable ratio reinforcement, chasing a hit of validation rather than a connection. He was paralyzed by the illusion of infinite choice. It raises a disturbing question that goes beyond just bad dates. What happens when we realize that the apps we trust to cure our loneliness are actually engineered with casino-level precision to keep us single? Okay, let's unpack this. That story, I mean, it felt deeply unsettling because it crystallizes something I think a lot of us feel about modern dating.
That the process itself has become the goal.
Exactly. It's displacing any chance at genuine connection. So this deep dive, we're going to analyze the neurobiological, the social, and even the evolutionary forces that are really at play when we're using these platforms.
Yeah, it's so necessary to move past just the stories, the anecdotes, and really look at the underlying data, the data that explains why these platforms work the way they do, and what the real costs are to you, to the users.
So what's our mission here? What are the key areas we need to hit?
Our mission today is to pull together 3 key interlocking insights from the research. First, we have to understand the individual psychological stuff, specifically this idea of dopamine dysregulation that drives the compulsive mechanical use you just described.
The brain chemistry.
Brain chemistry. Second, we have to zoom out and address this massive evolutionary mismatch between our sort of ancient mating psychology and the crazy hyperstimulus digital world we live in now. And third, we'll get into the sociocultural shifts that come from all that. We'll look at everything from, well, surprisingly persistent traditional gender roles to the modern psychology of just disappearing.
Yeah.
What we all now call ghosting.
Here's where it gets really, really interesting for me. We have to start with that core psychological mechanism because that compulsive rhythmic swiping, that behavior is textbook. It looks and feels like a low-grade addiction.
It does.
And the research confirms that these platforms are leveraging deep neurobiological mechanisms to make us behave that way. We're not just talking about a lack of willpower here. This feels more like chemical manipulation.
Absolutely. The data is
It's
very clear. Online dating platforms can and do lead to problematic usage patterns that look a lot like classical behavioral addictions.
Right.
And the key difference between, healthy engagement and what's problematic is that loss of control. It's when you keep doing it, despite the negative outcomes. We're looking at a genuine addictive cycle, and it's driven by dopamine dysregulation.
Okay, help me break that down. I mean, if I get a match and I feel good, isn't that just a natural reward? How does that cross the line into, dysregulation or addiction?
That is the crucial question. And the point is, the addictive loop is not about achieving intimacy. It's not about finding a healthy relationship. It's all about the dopamine rush that comes with the anticipation of reward, with novelty, and most critically, with the intermittent reward schedule.
So dopamine isn't the pleasure chemical, it's the wanting chemical.
It's the wanting chemical. That's a perfect way to put it. It drives seeking behavior.
Okay.
Think back to your friend in the coffee shop. His brain wasn't rewarding the outcome, the match, or a date. It was rewarding the act of looking, the act of seeking, the hope that the very next swipe might give him that unpredictable hit.
That's the variable ratio reinforcement you mentioned.
Exactly. It's the most powerful behavioral conditioning technique we know of. Because you don't know when the reward, the match, is going to show up. You just keep repeating the behavior, the swipe, over and over. It keeps that anticipation at a constant high level. The design makes sure your brain is chasing the expectation, not the actual outcome.
Wow. That makes the technology less of a tool for connection and more of an engine for just generating compulsive behaviors. What exactly do researchers identify as those behaviors in, say, heavy users?
Well, psychologists see a really distinct set of characteristics. First, there's compulsivity. That's the difficulty in controlling your usage, even when you know there are negative consequences.
Like scrolling when you know you should be working. Or when you're with friends, even.
Exactly that. Prioritizing the app over real face-to-face interaction. That's the first sign.
Okay, what's second?
Second, we see something called escalation. This is a gradual but very marked increase in the time and energy you devote to these apps over time. You find yourself spending longer and longer crafting the perfect profile, analyzing photos, swiping for hours, managing dozens of conversations that just fizzle out.
The investment keeps going up?
The investment goes up, but the return, that genuine connection, doesn't necessarily follow.
And I imagine a lot of the time users are using the app not for dating really, but as a quick fix for something else, a mood thing.
You've hit on the third key behavior, mood regulation. People start using these apps as a cheap, immediate coping mechanism to escape negative feelings, boredom, stress, anxiety, or, and this is the most ironic part, deep-seated loneliness.
That dopamine rush gives you a temporary superficial antidote.
It's a temporary fix. It's a form of avoidance, not a solution.
And that leads to the fourth sign.
It leads directly to the fourth characteristic, withdrawal. When you can't access the apps, your phone dies, you're in a meeting, you experience restlessness, irritability, just a generalized low mood. The very thing that was meant to cure your loneliness becomes a source of genuine distress when it's taken away. That completes the cycle of dependency.
It sounds like a textbook case of leveraging human vulnerability, especially when you think about the fact that these design choices are intentional. The sources call them addictive algorithms and designs, or AADs. This isn't a bug in the system.
It's a feature.
It's a feature.
That name is so important because it shifts the blame away from the user's supposed lack of discipline and puts it squarely on the engineering. These ADs, things like personalized recommendations, constant notifications, those variable reward schedules, they are specifically designed to exploit psychological vulnerabilities to maximize engagement.
Right. The company's main goal is to maximize profit through your sustained attention,
which often comes at the cost of your actual well-being.
And the impact of these designs seems especially stark when you look at groups that might be more vulnerable. We tend to think this is a young person's problem, but the research points to a surprisingly high susceptibility among older adults.
That finding is such an important counter-narrative. There is solid empirical evidence suggesting that older adults, so we're talking 60 and above, may be highly susceptible to these AEDs.
Why is that?
The vulnerability seems to come from factors like, well, increased social isolation, potentially higher levels of loneliness, and maybe just having less ingrained digital literacy, fewer defense mechanisms that you might have built up over a lifetime of using these platforms.
And to put that into real numbers, one study looked at older adults using platforms like WeChat, which isn't even just for dating, and they found pretty significant rates of problematic usage.
The figures are truly compelling. Using a validated scale to measure this problematic use, the study found that 54.1% of older participants showed high levels of engagement or, compulsive use.
Over half.
And even more striking, 6.4% actually met the established clinical criteria for addiction to the platform.
That 6.4% figure is huge, especially because the general national rate for this kind of problematic use in the same study was much, much lower, something like 2%.
That was, significantly lower.
So why are older adults so disproportionately vulnerable to these specific designs?
Researchers identified that the same ADs we've been talking about, the personalized recommendations that make you feel seen, the variable rewards that keep you hoping, those were the strongest predictors of addictive behavior in this older group. For someone who is socially isolated, the app is a highly available, immediate, and seemingly low-cost source of interaction and validation.
So that hit from a notification or a match is just an irresistible form of mood regulation.
It can be, yes. Yeah. So the overall conflict is pretty clear. The tech is designed to maximize your attention, which erodes your rational agency. And that's true regardless of your age or what you came to the app for in the first place.
Right. The whole debate around regulating these platforms kind of assumes adults can just regulate themselves, but the reality is the engineering is designed to make self-regulation almost impossible.
The initial conscious search for a connection can so quickly devolve into unconscious, compulsive behaviors that are just directed entirely by your brain's reward system. And that makes using these platforms in a healthy, intentional way a major psychological challenge.
So we've mapped the internal wiring, the neurobiology. We've confirmed the apps are basically hijacking our brains in the here and now. But what makes us so vulnerable to this system in the first place? Maybe the problem isn't just the phone. Maybe it's the operating system we brought to the table, our ancient psychology.
Precisely.
Yeah.
To really get the big picture, we have to shift our focus from individual psychology to, well, deep evolutionary time. You have to understand this concept of evolutionary mismatch in mating.
A mismatch.
A mismatch are fundamental psychological adaptations for choosing a partner. They were shaped in environments, the ancestral environment, that are just drastically different from today's digital reality.
So we're essentially running, what, 10,000-year-old software on a 5G network?
That's a great way to put it. And that ancestral environment looked nothing like today. Human groups were small. That meant mate pools were extremely limited. Every decision you made carried huge reputational and social costs.
And your family was involved?
Kin influence was often decisive.
Yeah.
People in their late teens or early 20s were often already experienced parents, deeply integrated into their family's structure.
Compare that to today.
Contrast that with modern people, who researchers categorize with this acronym, strangely weird. That's Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic.
Okay.
This group shows multiple mismatched characteristics when you compare them to our evolved psychology. And 3 of these are fundamentally disruptive to forming a pair bond in the digital space: hyperabundance, anonymity, and extreme autonomy in your mate choice.
Let's start with hyperabundance, the sheer number of options. That's the core driver behind my friend not being able to commit because maybe the next one is better.
That restlessness is rooted in what researchers call choice overload, and it's amplified exponentially by the digital environment. The dating platform presents this unprecedented, seemingly infinite scroll of potential partners. It just far, far exceeds the small local pools that we had ancestrally.
And that abundance actually changes how our brains work. It changes the cognitive strategy we use to assess people.
It really does. Research shows a clear shift. When your options are limited, like they were ancestrally, people tend to use a holistic assessment strategy.
Meaning you look at the whole person.
The whole person. You evaluate trade-offs across all their attributes. You look at non-visible cues like intelligence or personality. You're weighing the entire package.
But when you're faced with overwhelming choice, that kind of deep processing just breaks down.
The cognitive burden is way too high. So instead, you shift to an elimination by aspect strategy.
So if I'm shopping for a partner, I'm not asking if they're a decent whole person. I'm just filtering. Must be over 6 feet tall, or must like hiking, and I'm just getting rid of anyone who fails that one single superficial test.
That is a perfect visualization of it. You evaluate profiles one superficial attribute at a time just to quickly cut down the set of options. It's a coping mechanism for the sheer volume.
But it comes at a cost.
A huge cost. It leads to measurable dissatisfaction. Studies show that online daters who were forced to choose from larger sets, say 24 options versus just 6, they reported significantly less satisfaction with their final choice.
Even if they theoretically chose a better partner?
Even then.
That is so counterintuitive. More choice is supposed to make us happier, but here it just maximizes regret.
And the regret gets amplified by the ability to reverse your decisions.
Yeah.
The study found that the group who chose from the largest set and were told they could reverse their decision a week later, they were the least satisfied group of all. The constant awareness of other options drives that chronic dissatisfaction. It makes every connection you have feel incomplete because the infinite scroll promises perfection is just one swipe away.
Okay, let's move to that second mismatch. Anonymity and temporary relationships. The apps make it so easy to connect with a total stranger, engage for a bit, and then just vanish. No consequences.
And this is a massive departure from our ancestral groups where reputational accountability was everything. If you behaved badly, the entire small group knew about it, and it directly impacted your future mating prospects.
But today
we live in these huge segmented societies, and the apps let you engage in relationships with virtual strangers and then easily avoid any interaction afterwards.
And how does this environmental shift affect the differences we see in mating strategies between, say, men and women?
For men, this combination of anonymity, low reputational cost, and abundant options, especially options that display amplified cues to youth and fertility, which are evolved markers of female attractiveness, this can act as what we call a supernormal stimulus.
A supernormal stimulus, that's like an exaggerated artificial version of a natural cue, right?
Correct. Think of a bird that naturally prefers a slightly larger egg, but if you give it an enormous, brightly colored fake egg, it'll ignore the real one entirely.
And dating profiles are like those fake eggs.
Digital dating profiles, with their optimized photos and algorithms pushing these idealized forms, provide a continuous flow of supernormal stimuli. This hyperstimulation, without the old social costs, can intensify the male pursuit of short-term mating strategies. It can lead to greater choosiness and a real reluctance to settle down when the digital world is constantly providing an artificially optimized alternative.
And that flexibility, that freedom from the oversight of your family and your community, that's completely new and seems to promote short-term thinking over long-term, which is related to the third characteristic, autonomy and mate choice.
Yes, historically, kin your family exerted tremendous influence over who you married. It stabilized decisions, and it promoted long-term pair bonding because the choice wasn't just about two people, it was about two families.
But our modern environment,
Especially for young mobile adults, features people making these critical mating decisions often entirely on their own, without any closely watching family.
and we can see the real-world consequence of that in the demographic data.
The hypothesis is that without that stabilizing family input, you get more indecision, more delays, and long-term pair bonding. And U.S. Census data backs this up explicitly. The median age of first marriage is at an all-time high. It's currently 29.8 years for men and 27.8 for women.
Wow.
This delay suggests that without our ancestral support systems, our evolved mate selection adaptations are struggling to reach a final satisfying outcome when faced with limitless options.
So the overall psychological consequence of all these mismatches is severe.
It is. Our evolved mechanism for tracking alternative mates, which was adaptive, it was useful when mate pools were tiny, now it just leads to never-ending relationship dissatisfaction in this modern environment of perceived abundance. The system is working, but its input is mismatched, and it's causing this chronic restlessness and a profound psychological dilemma.
So when you combine that psychological discomfort of choice overload with the reality that users are making these quick decisions based on elimination by aspects, filtering quickly based on superficial traits, we inevitably shift away from romantic ideals and into the logic of the marketplace. Dating starts to look exactly like shopping.
That shift from a romantic narrative to market logic it's one of the most profound and concerning sociocultural implications of these apps.
Yeah.
Online dating inherently fosters a shopping culture.
Right.
Users feel they have to continually assess their value and look for a better deal, which empowers them to reverse choices easily. And this stands in direct opposition to the traditional romantic ideal.
Which promotes things like idealization, commitment, overcoming obstacles together.
Exactly. The romantic ideal suggests love transcends the economic thinking, but the app design treats mating as a resource allocation problem. I spend X amount of time, and I expect Y quality of partner.
That is the core tension.
It is. And when economic thinking takes over, individuals start analyzing every interaction based on what they're giving up versus what they're receiving, the classic social exchange framework.
And we see this shift taken to its extreme in some really controversial practices, what some call dime dating or for-profit dating.
This is where explicit compensation, either money or services, is exchanged for baits. It is the purest manifestation of transactional dating you can imagine.
And researchers actually studied this.
They did. They compared not-for-profit daters, so traditional online dating users, with for-profit daters who were in these dime dating arrangements. And they used that social exchange framework, which measures relational value based on the difference between rewards and costs, the net gains.
Right. And we know from decades of research that in traditional relationships, higher net gains, so getting more than you give, almost universally correlates with greater satisfaction and stability.
That's exactly what they found for the traditional daters. There was a significant positive correlation between a person's satisfaction level and a high reward-to-cost difference. If they felt the relationship was giving them a lot for minimal emotional or time cost, they were satisfied.
But that calculation was changed drastically for the dime daters. How did monetizing the transaction alter their perception of relational value?
The findings were truly remarkable. For the for-profit daters, that strong correlation between satisfaction and the reward-to-cost difference was not statistically significant.
It disappeared.
It disappeared. The market mechanism fundamentally altered the psychological calculation of the relationship.
So why do you think monetizing the date just nullifies the standard social exchange theory? What's happening there?
The research suggests that when a date is overtly monetized, the financial reward may absorb, or at least heavily discount, the perceived emotional and psychological costs. The transaction itself becomes the main predictable reward.
So the satisfaction you get from the human connection it's separated from the economic exchange.
Exactly. It becomes less influential in the final calculation of whether you feel satisfied or not.
Yeah.
The value is quantified before the interaction even begins.
That is a staggering implication, that money can essentially short-circuit the psychological processes we use to evaluate love and connection.
Okay, so in any marketplace, trust is the biggest issue, right? Especially when you're dealing with strangers. Since online dating is built on self-presentation and anonymity, how do users decide who is trustworthy enough to actually meet?
This takes us to something called the warranting principle. In an online environment, users know that people can easily misrepresent themselves. Studies consistently confirm that deception, often subtle exaggeration, is rampant in profiles.
Therefore, people prefer information that is harder to manipulate or fake. This is the warrant.
Okay, so if I claim to have a great job, that's a low warrant claim because it's easy for me to just write that. But if I'm tagged in a photo at my workplace, that might be a higher warrant. So the profile only matters as much as outside evidence can back it up.
That's the idea. Information from a third party, or something that takes more effort to fake, is perceived to have higher warranting value than just your own self-description. Third parties, like friends or a social network, they hold the potential to correct false information, which increases the credibility.
And researchers decided to test this by basically applying a feature that's really common in online retail, a reputation system.
Exactly. They tested the impact of adding a simple, short piece of positive third-party reputation information to dating profiles. And the results showed that this addition significantly increased the perceived trustworthiness of the candidate.
And this worked for everyone.
It held true across genders and regardless of the participants' general level of trust in strangers.
It just highlights this desperation to find some kind of credibility in a space that's built on self-promotion. But there was a critical, almost contradictory finding about that trustworthiness wasn't there.
Yes, and this is where you really see the hierarchy of decision-making come into play. While the third-party warrants solve the problem of trust making the person seem more credible and honest, they had no statistically significant effect on the participant's willingness to go out on a date with that person.
I find that truly counterintuitive. If I trust someone more, why am I not more willing to invest my time in meeting them?
It tells us that in the digital selection funnel, the process is highly bifurcated. The first hurdle is entirely aesthetic and superficial. The visual cue, the height, the immediate minimal aspects, that's the elimination by aspect strategy in action.
So trust is a secondary concern.
It's a secondary, maybe a maintenance concern. It ensures that the person you do select isn't a complete fraud, but it doesn't override those initial rapid-fire decisions based on primal or learned preferences. Looks and minimal profile cues still dominate the initial swipe. Trust only becomes relevant later, maybe when the messaging begins. And this tension between the promised freedom of the digital world and the reality of human behavior, it brings us to the sociocultural landscape. And what's fascinating here is how these revolutionary platforms often end up reinforcing, rather than dismantling, these deeply ingrained traditional gender scripts.
We have to start by establishing the historical context for female expectations. The sources refer to the myth of the siren. Why is that figure so persistent and powerful in defining female roles in courtship?
The siren, the alluring, confident, sexually aggressive young woman, is a deep, historical, negative role model. Tracing all the way back to mythology, the siren embodies the dangers of female sexuality that's outside the bounds of patriarchal control. She's a temptress whose song representing lust and independence lures men to their doom.
It prevents them from returning to the safety of the good wife, the mother, the stable social order.
Precisely. So the cultural message has been, for millennia, that female sexual assertiveness is inherently destructive to the man and to the family unit.
And that persists even in modern media.
Absolutely. Women are often forced into this dichotomy. You're either the asexual, domestic, good wife mother, or you're the bad, sexual, and self-serving other woman. Even when media portrays seemingly independent, financially successful women, their stories frequently end by reverting to the traditional quest for Mr. Right, which implicitly validates the old script.
So despite the veneer of post-feminist independence and, the digital freedom to approach anyone you want, the underlying cultural message is that deviating from the traditional courtship script is ultimately penalized. And that creates a huge conflict for modern users trying to navigate the dating pool.
It leads to conflicting goals, particularly when we examine how these scripts play out in actual user behavior. When researchers surveyed users about who should initiate and control the relationship, the findings were unexpectedly conservative. even among young adults who have only ever known dating apps.
We have specific survey findings on that initiation control. What does the data tell us about who should take charge?
A major survey found a very clear preference for traditional roles. Overall, women were significantly more likely than men to agree or strongly agree that the man should be in control of initiating the relationship.
That is genuinely shocking to me. Given all the tools for female empowerment, apps like Bumble that mandate female initiation, I would have expected that preference to be eroding, especially among younger users.
It gets even more nuanced. Women under 30 were the most likely demographic group to strongly agree with this traditional stance.
Wow.
Conversely, men over 60 were the least likely to agree. This suggests that the cultural script of male dominance in dating initiation isn't some relic of the past. It might be actively reinforced by younger generations.
Why?
Well, perhaps due to perceived social pressure, or just a preference for a clearly defined, less ambiguous courtship path. When a man initiates, the woman is protected from the social risk of appearing too aggressive or too available, which is a direct echo of that siren anxiety.
So if they're cautious about initiation, what about sexual expression and communicating interest? Do women take advantage of the supposed anonymity of the digital space to be more overt or assertive in signaling desire?
The data, again, suggests the dominance of caution. When it came to communicating attraction, women were significantly more likely than men to prioritize being cautious about letting someone know they're interested.
So they prefer subtlety, ambiguity.
They prefer indirect, low-risk methods of communicating interest, like a gentle touch or lingering eye contact over overt sexuality or direct verbal signals. And furthermore, women were notably more likely to agree that a woman should be somewhat sexually inhibited.
Which reinforces the idea that despite the supposed sexual liberation of the digital age, the fear of being culturally sanctioned as the siren, the sexually aggressive woman, it still maintains a strong social prohibition.
And it causes women to mask or minimize their sexual desires in an attempt to successfully attract and keep a mate.
It's the constant performance of the good girl script, even when you're just looking for a hookup or a date. And we see how these societal standards influence profile presentation, even in non-heterosexual contexts.
That's right. The need to conform to conservative societal norms drives digital self-presentation regardless of sexual orientation, especially in places where there is societal pressure against expressing your identity.
Right.
A study in Turkey, for example, looked at the use of decorative artifacts in male Tinder profiles across different sexual orientations. And while gay men certainly use some decorative artifacts to express identity, overall, the profile content stuck very strongly to conservative societal standards for masculine appearance.
Meaning, even if they wanted to express a more nuanced or less traditionally masculine identity, the fear of external social repercussions just forced them back into a conservative mold.
Precisely. The data showed that homosexual male Tinder users were not statistically different from heterosexual males in the high application of traditionally masculine decorative artifacts, like facial hair.
Yep.
Over 80% of both groups had facial hair.
So the conclusion is?
The conclusion was that the need to conform to conservative societal standards, in this case, to avoid sanctions in a country where opposition to the LGBT community is high, ultimately dictates how you present yourself online. The digital space may promise freedom, but the fear of offline social repercussions keeps the self-presentation conservative and traditional.
So if the apps are designed to maximize choice and minimize emotional investment, we have to look at how relationships end. The consequences of low commitment and hyper-choice are best encapsulated in this modern phenomenon of relational dissolution we know as ghosting.
Ghosting, that abrupt termination of communication without any explanation, it's not a new behavior, but its effortless execution is absolutely facilitated by digital platforms. Rejection on mobile dating happens in several primary asynchronous ways. Most commonly, ghosting, but also ignoring messages. The passive-aggressive swiping left after you've already been messaging, unmatching, and blocking.
The key feature is the ability for effortless, covert disengagement. It's just so much easier and less confrontational than a face-to-face rejection.
So much easier.
But romantic rejection has always carried this powerful emotional sting. Does the digital environment, by normalizing rejection, actually lessen the emotional blow for the person on the receiving end?
Surprisingly, the research suggests there is a mitigating effect. Despite ghosting being widely described by those who experience it as hurtful and anxiety-inducing, recipients often express a notable level of indifference when they're interviewed.
Really? indifference.
Yes, they'll state that rejection is simply common or expected in the global dating environment.
So because the market is so vast and the relationships are so disposable, users just develop a thicker skin.
Exactly. The emotional consequences are mitigated by the pervasive nature of low commitment and the knowledge that the next potential partner is only a swipe away. The frequent exposure to rejection effectively normalizes the pain, making the emotional sting less severe than it would be in an offline context where the commitment level is higher. It just becomes a mundane part of the experience.
But the people who do the ghosting, the ghosters, they have this remarkable internal conflict about it. When they talk about being ghosted themselves, they condemn it. They call it inappropriate and immature, a sign of poor relationship skills. Yet they do it all the time.
This is the core of the disjunctive views of ghosting. People condemn the behavior when they're the victim, yet they readily offer a set of strong justifications when they're the perpetrator. Researchers explored these justifications and found 4 main themes that rationalize this avoidance behavior.
What was the primary way people justified using ghosting as an exit strategy?
The first and most common justification centered on the perceived lack of relationship investment or commitment. The mantra was, the relationship lacked commitment, so I owed them nothing.
Okay.
Participants felt justified in ghosting if the relationship was defined as casual, not serious, or if the interaction was only a few days of texts. The reasoning is that if no one was ever led on, a formal exit was unnecessary. The low investment level of the medium dictated the low-effort exit strategy.
Essentially, they're arguing that the nature of the platform exempts them from standard relational etiquette.
Precisely. The second justification involved the quality of the communication. Many ghosters claimed the relationship was going nowhere and consisted of empty texts or random stuff.
So since the communication lacked any meaningful direction or depth,
stopping the exchange seemed justified as less awkward than trying to formally explain why they weren't interested in moving forward. It's a passive way of communicating termination when there was little real communication to begin with.
the third justification relates directly back to the infrastructure we've been discussing, that hyperabundance provided by the dating app itself.
Correct. Ghosters often acknowledge that because the relationship started on a dating app, it provides a sort of cultural norm that makes ghosting expected. Users suggest that because dating apps offer a plethora of possibilities and a running list of people who are interested, the individual connection just seems less valuable. It makes it easy to let people go. One participant even noted, it's easy for people to just, let people go, ghost them.
The knowledge of limitless alternatives provides the psychological license to disengage without explanation. It's purely a function of the marketplace.
Absolutely. The perception of limitless options makes the current connection seem less valuable and easily replaceable. And finally, the fourth justification involved using ghosting as a form of conflict avoidance or self-protection. Ghosting was used to avoid a painful confrontation or, significantly, as a necessary response to disrespect or unwanted sexual advances. In these instances, ghosting becomes a justified form of boundary enforcement. It's a quick and safe way to exit a potentially uncomfortable or threatening situation without putting yourself at risk. It's clear that digital dating is a site of constant and often uncomfortable tension. We see the conflict between our neurobiological drive for intermittent reward, the evolutionary challenge of navigating limitless choice, and the friction between the promise of modern autonomy and the stubborn persistence of traditional social roles.
The platforms offer this unparalleled access and connection capability, yet at the same time, they embed mechanisms like the variable ratio reinforcement of the swipe and the promise of endless alternatives that encourage chronic restlessness and dissatisfaction with any actual outcome. The system is designed to keep you engaged in the search, not satisfied with the find.
The most significant finding, tying all these threads together, is how the digital transformation of mating has effectively separated the act of seeking validation, that immediate, cheap dopamine hit of a match, from the act of pursuing actual relationship investment. This separation creates a self-perpetuating cycle where users are technologically compelled to believe that the potential of the next swipe will always be superior to the grounded, complex, and imperfect reality of the current connection, thereby fostering the very loneliness the apps were intended to solve.